Hello, I'm Brad Frost, and today we're going to talk about design system governance. So, our company, Big Medium, we help organizations of all shapes and sizes establish and evolve their design systems. Not just the assets and the architecture, but also the people and the process and the culture around the design system, which is the hard stuff that really makes or breaks an effort like this. And one thing that we encounter a lot is that when users of a design system encounter issues when using the system, they often have a hard time distinguishing between what's a bug, what's a missing feature, what's an intentional design deviation, what's a pattern or recipe that they need to own and create, or anything else. Often, all they know is that the design system isn't doing what they need it to do and they need help, right? So, the best thing that a design system team could do is to make it abundantly and obnoxiously clear that when anyone has any questions or runs into any issues, they have concerns, they're confused, is to reach out and have a conversation, right? That ability to connect and have a conversation is overwhelmingly the most important part of a successful design system governance process. Because it's through that conversation that the design system team and product team can connect and collaborate on how best to move forward. So let's come in and sort of get into the nuance, because a lot of times things show up to a design system team in the form of a bug, when in fact it almost never is. It's just oftentimes that's the only button that especially developers know how to push, right? They're like looking at a comp, it looks different than what's in the code library, and they push the design system bug button. But what we found is that it's really helpful to distinguish between a bug, which is a defect, right? Like the accordion doesn't open or close, or there's not sufficient color contrast in the primary background and foreground colors, for instance, right? So that there's a bug, that's its own thing. But then there's other things like a visual discrepancy, which may be a bug, meaning that the design systems design library and code library are out of sync. That should be addressed. But a lot of times it's a product designer detaching an instance and doing their own thing, or inventing their own unique patterns and stuff like that. A design system feature is something that's maybe missing for the current design system library. And then a pattern or recipe is a composition of design system components and or some custom elements that go along with it that should be used consistently across a product, but don't necessarily belong in the core design system. So, kind of understanding the difference between these types of issues or things that teams tend to encounter can be really, really helpful to create a shared understanding on what to do about it. So, let's talk about what to do about it. So, I created this flowchart that details the design system governance process, and I've updated it to include some of this nuance here. So let's get into it. So a product team comes to the design system to help them design and develop user interfaces, hopefully pretty uncontroversial there. And teams reach for components. Hopefully they see the component they need. Hopefully those components do what they need it to do. And when that's the case, they're good to go, right? That's the happy path. That's what we're all shooting for, right? But what happens if the component doesn't exist or doesn't do what they need it to do? In that case, this is where, again, overwhelmingly, they should know to reach out to the design system team and have a conversation with them, right? That is like the most important part of this entire flow, right? And it's by way of a conversation that we're able to figure out what to do about it. And a lot of times, one of the beautiful things about this process is that a lot of times new work doesn't need to happen. Just by way of a quick conversation could save hours, days, or even weeks of work, right? The design system team is able to guide the product design team to an existing solution that meets their needs, and then they're good to go, right? And the design system team can update maybe their documentation based on the results of those conversation to avoid, receiving the same question again, right? But sometimes new work does need to happen. Oftentimes it does. And this is the new part, right? So what we're doing here is we're basically saying, well, what's the nature of this new work, right? Is it a new feature? Is it a visual discrepancy? Or is it a bug? We'll start with bug just because this is kind of the most straightforward. Let's say a design system user plugs in the accordion, it's not opening or closing, or there's a custom select drop down and you click outside of the select and it doesn't close the select menu, right? That's called a bug, and the bug gets added to the backlog and really needs to be addressed with like a really high priority, right? This is like a 5-alarm fire for design system teams, right? This is like drop everything because this is a real defect in the product that's out there in the wild, right? So get a patch release out there that addresses this issue. But sometimes it's a visual discrepancy, which may or may not be a bug, right? So the first question to ask is like, well, okay, is this discrepancy between the design library and the code library of the design system, right? And if it is a design system inconsistency, that should be treated as a bug and addressed straight away, right? But a lot of times it is a product level decision, right? There, where it's basically the product team has created some new science somewhere along the lines. And often it's the developer trying to figure out, well, what do I do about this, right? So the next question, whenever you do have these deviations, these visual deviations from the system, it's like, well, is that discrepancy deliberate and justifiable? I'm a product designer and I really love the color purple, and so I made these buttons purple. And while that's nice and all, that goes against the organizational standard, right, within the design system. So in that case, it's not a justifiable design deviation. And so just by way of that kind of quick conversation, the product team can update the design to better adhere to the design system's conventions. But sometimes, by way of conversation, you're able to say, oh yeah, like that is an intentional and justifiable reason to go about it, including, well, we actually want to trial out these purple buttons to see if they convert better. We're running these A/B tests, or there's a specific campaign and we need these purple buttons. In that case, it's intentional and justifiable or whatever, and you can determine that collectively. In which case, the product team can move forward with implementing that custom design, but also the design system team can make a note to kind of capture that, to come back to the product team for research and discussion later, like, hey, how'd those purple buttons go, for instance, right? So that's an important part of this process, is just kind of unpacking, like, when you see sort of different visual implementations, it's like, are those things accidental? Are they justifiable? So then let's get into new features, right? So maybe the nature of the work is, here's a new feature, like a dismissible chip component, for instance, right? From there, you could ask, well, does this new feature belong in the design system? If the answer to that is no, it's a recipe or a snowflake. Let's say it's a customer card, right? And a customer card is an arrangement of core design system components like an avatar or a key value table or something like that, that's meant to be used consistently across a product, but isn't abstract enough or isn't reusable enough to be used across the entire organization. In which case, if that's the case, then the product team kind of owns that work and they go ahead and build that in their own world. But if the thing does belong in the design system, right, like this dismissible chip component, it's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and lots of teams might be able to benefit from that, right? The next question then becomes, well, can that work be added to the design system while meeting the product deadline, while also not sacrificing the high quality bar for inclusion in the design system? And so sometimes it's like, oh yeah, we need this by the end of next week. And it's like, oh, sorry, that's too short. You go ahead and own that product team, and we'll sort of come back and revisit it whenever we do have time. But sometimes it's, oh yeah, we can get that done in time, and we can just kind of build that directly in the design system. So if we just by sort of zooming out here, all of this big decision tree really takes the form of a couple minute conversation, right? At most, it's basically just like, hey, I'm looking for this. The design system team says, here's that thing. Thank you very much. Moving on, right? So it could be just even a couple of seconds. But whenever you get into, well, we're trying to do this different thing, you can kind of figure out collectively how best to proceed. And it's by way of this kind of coming together and collaboration that you're able to sort of not just figure out what makes sense from an architecture and an implementation standpoint, but what you're also doing is just building that relationship and building that trust and that sort of collaborative spirit within your organization, which is really quite beautiful. So this couple minute conversation is really what drives the ongoing success of a design system, and the ongoing success of the product design and development organizations at a company. We tend to think that whenever we don't hear from product teams, we train our clients and the people that we work with that should be something that makes you very, very nervous. If you're not hearing questions or issues or any sort of feedback from the users of the design system, that should not be a sign that everything is going well, but in fact that things aren't maybe going so well. I've said before, design systems die in the darkness. So really do all you can to facilitate collaboration and conversation between everyone involved in your design system success. So hope that this is helpful. If you need help with your design systems, feel free to reach out. If there's anything I could help clarify, feel free to reach out. Yeah, have a great day. Take care. Thanks.